The silence of my house was broken by the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway, a sound I hadn't expected on a quiet Tuesday evening. I am Brittany Hughes. I am 68 years old, a widow of 5 years, and I value my peace above almost everything else. I pulled back the living room curtain just an inch. It was my daughter Sarah and her husband Greg. They hadn't called. They rarely did lately unless they wanted something. I took a deep breath, smoothed my sweater, and opened the front door before they could even ring the bell. They stepped inside, bringing the cold autumn air with them. Sarah kissed my cheek, her perfume overly floral and sharp. Greg trailed behind his eyes, immediately doing that familiar scan of the room, like a real estate appraiser, calculating square footage and market value. He had always been a man who looked at things not for what they were, but for what they could be sold for. I offered them coffee, but they declined. They sat at my kitchen table, their coats still on. Greg placed a thick manila envelope on the oak wood surface. He didn't push it toward me, just left it sitting there like a loaded weapon. "Mom, we've been talking about your future." Sarah began, her voice dripping with a rehearsed, sickly sweet concern. "Living alone in this big house. It's a lot to manage. We want to make things easier for you." Greg slid the papers out of the envelope. "It's a standard power of attorney for property and finances. It just lets us handle the heavy lifting. We had it drawn up to save you the hassle." I stared at the document, then up at my daughter. "I haven't read this. I'll need my lawyer to look it over." Sarah smiled, placing her hand over mine. "You don't need your own lawyer, Mom. It's just family. It's to protect you." I slowly pulled my hand away, leaving the papers untouched on the table. The shift in her tone told me everything I needed to know. I knew exactly what my next move would be. I didn't argue with them that night. I simply nodded, told them I was tired, and left the envelope on the kitchen table when I showed them out. The moment their taillights faded down the street, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, sat down, and read the document line by line. It wasn't a standard arrangement to help me pay bills if I fell ill. It was an immediate, broad transfer of power. It gave Sarah and Greg the absolute right to sell my home, empty my accounts, and manage my investments without my consent. I didn't cry. Tears are a waste of hydration when what you really need is clarity. My husband Thomas and I had worked 40 years for this house and the small nest egg that kept me comfortable. I wasn't about to hand the keys to a son-in-law who couldn't keep a job for more than 2 years, and a daughter who thought my independence was an inconvenience. The next morning, I woke up at 6, just as I always do. I watered my ferns, ate my toast, and drove straight to my bank. I sat with the branch manager and placed strict in-person-only verification flags on every single account I owned. No transfers, no withdrawals, no changes, without my physical presence and signature. When I got home, I picked up the phone and made 2 calls. The first was to my longtime estate lawyer, Margaret. The second was to her colleague, a specialist in elder property rights. I explained the situation calmly and asked if they had time for a brief house call on Saturday morning. Once that was settled, I sent Sarah a simple text message. "Come over at 11:00 a.m. on Saturday. We will discuss the paperwork." She replied within seconds. "Great, see you then, Mom. Love you." I set my phone face down on the counter. She thought she had won, but she was going to realize she wasn't walking into the room alone. Saturday morning arrived with crisp, clear skies. I cleaned the house not out of anxiety, but out of habit. I vacuumed the rugs, dusted the mantel, and set out a tray of iced water and glasses. Margaret and her colleague arrived right on time at 10:45 a.m. I welcomed them in, and they took their seats on the love seat, opening their briefcases with practiced efficiency. At exactly 11:03 a.m., the front door rattled. Sarah walked in without knocking, Greg close behind her. "Mom, we brought pastries." Sarah froze in the entryway. The white bakery box in her hands dipped slightly as she took in the sight of the 2 professionals sitting in my living room. Greg's neutral, calculating expression instantly dissolved into sheer panic. "Mom, who are these people?" Sarah stammered, glancing between me and the briefcases. "You said I didn't need my own lawyer, Sarah," I replied, gesturing to the empty chairs opposite me. "So I decided to invite two. Have a seat." Margaret spoke first. Her tone was devoid of emotion, entirely factual. She explained that she had reviewed the document they left. She pointed out line by line the unusually expansive scope of the permissions. She noted that signing it would essentially strip me of my legal autonomy and allow my house to be sold by Monday morning if they so chose. "We were just trying to simplify things," Sarah protested, her face flushing a deep, angry red. "You're getting older, Mom. We're your family. I am perfectly capable of managing my own life," I answered quietly. I picked up the document from the coffee table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't hurl accusations. I simply tore the thick stack of papers cleanly in half, then in half again, and dropped the pieces into the wastebasket. "Do not ever bring something like this into my home again," I stated. Greg wouldn't look at me. Sarah grabbed her purse, her jaw tight, and stormed out, leaving the bakery box on the console table. But as I cleaned up later, I realized she had taken something else on her way out. After Margaret and her colleague left the house, returned to its usual quiet state, I went to the front hall to throw away the pastry box Sarah had abandoned. As I reached for the handle of the console drawer, my eyes drifted to the small wooden hookboard mounted by the coat rack. There were 3 hooks, one for my car keys, one for my everyday house keys, and the third for the spare key I kept for emergencies. The third hook was empty. I stood there for a long moment staring at the blank space. I hadn't moved it. I hadn't lent it to a neighbor. Sarah had grabbed it on her way out the door, a silent, petty act of rebellion after her legal shortcut had been shut down. She wanted to prove she still had access to my life, that she could still cross my boundaries whenever she saw fit. A younger, more fragile version of me might have called her demanding it back, getting dragged into a useless, emotionally draining argument. Or perhaps I would have spent the night wide awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when she might let herself in. Instead, I went to the kitchen, opened my physical phone book, I still prefer paper, and found the number for a local locksmith. "Hello," I spoke clearly into the receiver. "I need all the exterior locks changed on a residential property. Today, if possible." The locksmith was at my house by 3 o'clock. He was a polite young man who worked quickly, swapping out the old brass deadbolts for heavy-duty modern locks. I paid him in cash, took the fresh set of keys, and slipped one onto my keyring. The heavy clunk of the new deadbolt sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I had heard all week. I didn't text Sarah to tell her. I didn't need to justify securing my own home. I simply made myself a fresh pot of coffee and sat down at my desk. If she felt entitled to my house key, I needed to see what else she felt entitled to. It was time to look at the bank statements. I spent Sunday morning with a red pen and a stack of printed bank statements spread across my kitchen table. Since my husband Thomas died, I had kept my financial routine mostly on autopilot. Grief makes you tired. And sometimes it's just easier to let the automatic withdrawals run than to untangle a lifetime of joint expenses. But as I dragged the red pen down the columns, the reality of my passive generosity stared back at me. There was the auto pay for a premium family cell phone plan. 3 lines. I only used 1. Sarah and Greg were the other 2. Down further was a quarterly withdrawal for car insurance. I checked the policy number in my files. It covered my sedan and Greg's SUV. I had been paying their vehicle insurance for 5 years, because Sarah once cried about how tight money was when Greg was between jobs. They were trying to steal my house, yet they were comfortably living off my dime every single month. I logged into my banking portal. I didn't feel anger. I felt a cold, sharp sense of purpose. I clicked on the cell phone provider and removed my card from the auto pay. I called the insurance company and explicitly removed Greg's vehicle from my policy effective at midnight. I then canceled a streaming service subscription that I never watched but knew they use daily. I didn't leave a voicemail. I didn't send a warning text. A boundary is not a negotiation. I was done negotiating my own resources. I closed my laptop, packed away my financial folders, and went outside to pull weeds in my garden. The weather was turning cooler, the leaves just starting to brown at the edges. I kneeled in the dirt, breathing in the scent of damp earth, feeling lighter than I had in years. I knew the silence wouldn't last forever. The bills were due on Tuesday. The consequences of my clicks would land in their laps by Wednesday. The fallout was coming, and I was entirely ready for it. It happened on Thursday afternoon. I was in the kitchen carefully slicing apples for a pie, enjoying the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. The peace was shattered by the aggressive metallic rattling of the front doorknob. Someone was trying to force a key into the lock, twisting and pushing with angry frustration. I set down my knife, wiped my hands on my apron, and walked to the entryway. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see Sarah's silhouette. She was practically vibrating with rage, slamming her palm against the wood. "Mom, open the door!" she yelled, her voice muffled but distinct. I unlatched the deadbolt, leaving the heavy security chain firmly in place, and opened the door a few inches. Sarah's face was flushed, her makeup slightly smeared. She held up the old useless spare key. "What is this?" "Did you change the locks? I couldn't get in." "That's exactly what changing the locks means." "Sarah," I replied evenly, not stepping back. "Why would you do that? And why did my phone suddenly stop working this morning? Greg got a notice that his car is uninsured. Are you crazy?" She expected me to shrink. She expected an apology or an explanation she could tear apart. "I am securing my property and organizing my finances," I stated, keeping my voice level. You are 51 years old, Sarah. I will no longer pay your bills and you no longer have free access to this house. You lost that privilege when you tried to trick me out of my home." "We were trying to help you," she screamed, gripping the edge of the door. "You're acting like a paranoid old woman." "I am acting like a homeowner who pays her own way," I corrected her. "You can pay your own from now on." I didn't wait for her next insult. I gently but firmly pushed the door against her grip, waited for her to step back, and shut it. The new deadbolt clicked into place with a heavy, final thud. She stood on the porch, shouting a threat I knew she couldn't back up. "You're going to die alone in that house," Sarah had screamed through the solid wood door before finally stomping back to her car. "Don't expect us to come checking on you." It was a cruel thing to say to a widow, designed specifically to strike at the deepest fear of aging. She expected that threat to break me. She thought I would unlock the door, run out to the driveway, and beg her not to abandon me. Instead, I went back to my kitchen and finished baking my apple pie. The next few weeks were surprisingly beautiful. Without the constant hum of Sarah's demands and Greg's silent judgments, my house felt vast and welcoming. I didn't sit by the phone waiting for an apology. I took control of my time. I joined a local community gardening club that met on Tuesday mornings. I reconnected with an old friend from my teaching days, and we started taking Thursday walks in the park. I slept soundly, my finances were secure, and my doors were locked. I wasn't lonely, I was liberated. Sarah, on the other hand, was playing a waiting game she didn't realize she had already lost. She didn't call, and I didn't reach out. I knew how they lived. Greg spent money faster than he earned it, and Sarah was obsessed with keeping up appearances. Without my silent subsidies, the insurance, the phones, the occasional loans I used to give them when they complained about groceries, their lifestyle was unsustainable. The silence stretched for exactly 1 month and 12 days. The leaves had fallen entirely, leaving the trees bare against the gray November sky. I was sitting on the porch with a heavy blanket and a mug of hot cider when I saw their car pull up. It wasn't a furious arrival this time. The car moved slowly. The bluff was over. The financial reality of adulthood had finally caught up with them. They walked up the driveway, slowly lacking the aggressive entitlement of their last visit. Greg looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped carrying a heavy duffel bag. Sarah looked pale, her usual perfectly styled hair pulled back into a messy knot. I didn't get up from my porch chair. I just tightened my grip on my mug and waited. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said, her voice unusually small. She stopped at the bottom of the porch stairs. "Sarah," I acknowledged, nodding slightly. "Can we come in? It's freezing out here." "We can talk right here," I replied, my tone leaving no room for argument. Greg dropped the duffel bag onto the concrete. It made a heavy, pathetic sound. "Mom," Sarah began, her eyes darting nervously toward the neighbors' houses. "Greg." "Well, Greg lost his job 2 weeks ago, and our landlord decided not to renew our lease. We had to be out by yesterday." I took a slow sip of my cider. "I see. We need to stay here," she said, trying to force a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Just temporarily. Just for a few months until we get back on our feet. You have 3 empty bedrooms, Mom." It makes sense. The audacity was almost breathtaking. Less than 2 months ago, they had sat in my living room and tried to legally strip this house away from me. When that failed, they berated me, insulted me, and threatened to leave me to rot. Now, because they had mismanaged their own lives, they expected to move in and take over the space they couldn't steal. "No," I said simply. Sarah blinked clearly, not comprehending the word. "What do you mean, no? We don't have anywhere else to go. Oh, this is my childhood home." "This is my home," I corrected her. "And it is not a hotel for people who treat me with disrespect. You are not moving in." She stared at me, the realization hitting her like physical blow. I had prepared for this exact moment. "You can't be serious," Sarah yelled, the fragile facade of politeness instantly shattering. "You're my mother. You have a massive house. You're just going to leave us on the street. You are adults. You will figure it out," I said calmly. I stood up, setting my empty mug on the side table. "Mom, please." Sarah stepped up onto the porch, tears suddenly spilling over her cheeks. It was the thumbnail scene playing out exactly as her desperation peaked. She reached out, grabbing the railing. "We have no money. Greg's credit is ruined. Please just let us in. I'm sorry about the lawyer thing." "Okay, I'm sorry. Just open the door." She was crying, sobbing loudly, begging at my door. A mother's instinct is to fix her child's pain, to swoop in and cushion the fall. But I knew that if I opened that door, I would never get them out. They would drain my accounts, take over my space, and reduce me to a maid in my own home. I walked over to the far corner of the porch, where 3 large, neatly taped cardboard boxes sat under a waterproof tarp. I pulled the tarp back. "I packed these last week," I told her. "It's all the childhood belongings you left in the basement. Your yearbooks, your old clothes, your records. I don't want them taking up space anymore. Take them with you." Sarah stared at the boxes, her mouth open in shock. "You packed my things." "I am cleaning house, Sarah, in every sense of the word." I walked to the front door, turned the knob, and stepped inside. "Mom, wait! Don't shut the door! Please!" she wailed, leaning toward the frame. I looked her directly in the eyes. "Goodbye, Sarah. Figure it out." I closed the solid wood door and turned the new, heavy deadbolt. Click. Her cries were muffled behind the thick wood, but I didn't stay to listen. I walked into this kitchen and put the kettle on. It has been 6 months since I closed the door on my daughter and her husband. I heard through the grapevine a mutual aunt that they didn't end up on the street. Greg's brother let them sleep on an air mattress in his basement until they found a cramped, overpriced apartment across town. They are both working now, forced to actually sustain their own lives because the Bank of Mom is permanently closed. Some people in my generation might call me cold. They might say a mother's job is to sacrifice everything for her children to endure the disrespect, just to have them at the holiday table. I disagree. I raised my daughter. I fed her, educated her, and loved her. But my duty to parent ended when she became an adult. I have no obligation to be a victim to her greed. My life now is wonderfully predictable. The crack in the kitchen ceiling has finally been repaired. My garden is thriving. I planted a new row of tulips along the front walkway that should bloom beautifully in the spring. I manage my own finances, I pay my own bills, and I hold the only keys to my front door. Sometimes when the house is entirely silent, I sit in my favorite armchair by the window and look out at the street. I don't feel a lingering sadness. I don't feel guilt. I just feel an overwhelming sense of relief. Boundaries are not walls to keep the world out. They are fences to protect what belongs to you. I built mine late, but I built it strong. I live in my own house. I make my own decisions. I keep my own counsel. And after 68 years of noise, the quiet is exactly what I deserve.